Hello friends, today I would be teaching you all about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So let's get started with the video. And sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Androsium consists of whorls of stamens representing the male reproductive organ and the gynosium represents the female reproductive organ. What androsium is and the stamens represent the male reproductive organ and the gynosium represents the female reproductive organ. Okay, two parts of a typical stamen are the long and slender stalk called the filament and the terminal generally bilobed structure is called the anther. Like this. Okay. The proximal end of the filament of the stamen is attached to the anther. The proximal end, which end? Proximal end is attached to the anther or the petal of the flower. A bilobed anther consists of 4 microsporangia located at the corners in lobes. They develop further and become pollen sacs. What they become? They become pollen sacs. In microsporangium, cells of the tapetum possess dense cytoplasm and generally have more than one nucleus. When anther is young, a group of compactly arranged homogeneous cells, called sporogenous tissue occupies the center of each microsporangium. Sporogenous tissues, a group of compactly arranged homogeneous cells, these are. The process of formation of microspores from pollen mother cells through meiosis is called microsporogenesis. What's it called? It's called microsporogenesis. Formation of microspores. The pollen grains represents the male gametophytes. Pollen grains represents the male gametophyte. The hard outer layer of the pollen grain called exine is made up of sporopollenin. Exine is made up of sporopollenin. Okay. Pollen grain exine has prominent apertures called germ pores where sporopollenin is absent. Pollen grains are well preserved at fossil because of the presence of sporopollenin. Okay. They act as fossil due to presence of sporopollenin. The inner wall of the pollen grain is called intine. It is thin and continuous layer made up of cellulose and pectin. Intine is the inner wall layer and it is thin continuous layer made up of cellulose and pectin. When the pollen grain is mature, it contains 2 cells, a vegetative cell and a generative cells. How many cells it contains? It contains 2 cells, a vegetative one and a generative one. In over 60% of the angiosperms, 60% of the angiosperms, pollen grains are said at 2-celled stage. It is possible to store pollen grains of a large number of species for years in a liquid nitrogen medium at minus 196 degrees Celsius. Okay, you can store the pollens. Each pistil has 3 parts: stigma, style and ovary. Stigma serves as a landing platform for pollen grains. The style is elongated slender part beneath the stigma. The basal bulge part of the pistil is the ovary. Here I can make this for you. Okay. Arising from the placenta are the megasporangia, commonly called as ovules. The body of the ovule fuses with the funicle in the region called hilum. You can learn by of. You can learn it by the of. Like ovule plus funicle equal to hilum. Okay. 1 minute. Ovule plus funicle gives the hilum. Okay. Each ovule has 1 or 2 protective envelopes called as integuments. These are the protective envelopes called as integuments. Opposite the micropylar end, there is chalaza representing the basal part of the ovule. Chalaza represents the basal part of the ovule. Enclosed within the integument is a mass of cells called as nucellus. An ovule generally has a single embryo sac formed from a megaspore. Ovules generally differentiated into a single megaspore mother cells into the micropylar region. In the micropylar region, the method of embryo sac formation from a single megaspore is termed as monosporic development. What it's termed as monosporic development. The two nuclei in an embryo sac are called polar nuclei and are situated below the egg apparatus. Where? Below the egg apparatus in the large central cell. Three cells are grouped together at the micropylar and they constitute egg apparatus. Three cells at the micropylar end forms the egg apparatus. The synergids have special cellular thickenings at the micropylar tip called filiform apparatus. Three cells are at the chalaza and are called antipodals. A typical angiosperm embryo cell sac at maturity has 8 nucleate and it's 7 celled. You have to learn this fact. 8 nucleate and 7 celled. Some plants such as viola, oxalis and camelina produce two types of flowers. Chasmogamous flowers which are similar to flowers of other species with exposed anther and stigma, and clistogamous flowers which do not open at all. So self-pollination will occur in which plants? What do you think? Clistogamous or chasmogamous? It would be clistogamous. Okay. In clistogamous flowers are invariably autogamous as there is no chance of cross-pollination landing to stigma. Okay, Getinogamy is transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another flower of the same plant. Means it's also a self-pollination type. Pollination by water is quite rare in flowering plants and is limited to about 30 genera, mostly monocotyledonous plants, monocots. In Vallisneria, the female flower reaches the surface of water by the long stalk and the male flowers or pollen grains are released onto the surface of water. In most of the water pollinated species, pollen grains are protected from wetting by mucilaginous covering. To sustain animal visits, the flowers have to provide rewards to animals. Nectar and pollen grains are the usual floral rewards, nectar and the pollen grains. And in water pollinated species, there is a mucilaginous covering. In some species, floral rewards are in providing safe places to lay eggs. An example is that of the tallest flowers of Amorphophilus. Which one? Tallest flower of the Amorphophilus. Continued self-pollination. What continued self-pollination results in inbreeding depression because no new genes or new varieties will be formed. Okay. If both male and female flowers are present on the same plant such as castor and maize, it prevents autogamy. But not getinogamy because the pollens from one flower will be put into the stigma of the another flower of the same plant. So it's just autogamy. Or getinogamy is the process. The pistil has the ability to recognize the pollen whether it is compatible or incompatible. Pollen grain germinates on the stigma to produce a pollen tube through one of the germ pore where exine was absent. Pollen tube after reaching the ovary enters the ovule through the micropylar and enters one of the degenerating synergids through the filiform apparatus. Where it goes to the micropylar pole. All the events from pollen deposition on the stigma until pollen tubes enter the ovules are referred to as pollen pistil interaction. What it's called? Pollen pistil interaction. If the female parents bear bisexual flowers, removal of anthers from the flower bud before the anther dehiscence using a pair of forceps is necessary. This step is referred to as emasculation, means that you are removing the male part. Okay. Emasculation. After entering one of the synergids, pollen tube releases two male gametes into the cytoplasm of synergid. The male gamete fuses with two polar nuclei located at a central, produces a triploid primary endosperm nucleus, PEN, primary endosperm nucleus, PEN. Okay. The formation of PEN involves fusion of three haploid nuclei, which terms as triple fusion. The central cell after triple fusion becomes PEC and develops into endosperm, primary endosperm cell, which forms the endosperm. The coconut water which you drink from tender coconut is free nuclear endosperm. What? It's endosperm containing thousands of nuclei, and the surrounding white kernel is the cellular endosperm. Embryo develops at the micropylar end of the embryo sac where zygote is situated. Embryo develops as micropylar pole. The portion of embryonal axis above the level of cartilage is epicotyle and terminates with the plumule or the stem tip. Plumule forms the stem tip. In the grass family, the cotyledon is called scutellum, sealed sepate, that is situated toward one side or lateral side of the embryonal axis. Grass family have a special kind of cotyledon called scutellum, which is present on the lateral side of the embryonal axis. Epicotyle has shoot apex and a few leaf primoria enclosed in a hollow foliar structure called coleoptile. In some seeds such as black pepper and beet, the residual persistent nucellus is the perisperm. The persistence nucellus in black pepper and beet is called perisperm. As the seed matures, it becomes relatively dry and contains 10 to 15% moisture by mass. The wall of ovary develops into wall of fruit called as pericarp. In few species like apple cashew, the thalamus contributes to fruit formation. Such fruits are called false fruits. What they are called? They are called false fruit. The oldest viable seed is that of Lupinus arcticus, excavated from Arctic tundra. A 2000-year-old viable seed, Phoenix dactylifera, was discovered at King Herod's palace near the Dead Sea. 2000-year-old Phoenix dactylifera, King Herod's palace near Dead Sea. Apomixis is the form of asexual reproduction that mimics sexual reproduction. Apomixis is an asexual reproduction process that mimics the sexual reproduction. So this is all about this chapter. And polyembryony is seen in citrus or mango fruit, nucellar polyembryony. Epicotyle forms the plumule, forms the shoot tip. Hypocotyle forms the radicle, the root tip. Okay, and these are the parasites. So this is an apomixis is seen in grass or Asteraceae family. So they can ask you the tick marks. Apomixis is seen in grass and Asteraceae family. So this is all about this chapter. I hope you like the session. Do like, subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot.